Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 234. Any questions, comments? Please request to speak. We have a couple of news to discuss on Tesla, but nothing too major. And it's a Thanksgiving weekend, so if you can get out of here early, then that's even better. Today, AI stocks are down quite a bit. NVIDIA is down 3.3%. And other stocks are down as well. So maybe the AI bubble is already bursting. And curious to see if anybody has any questions. But NVIDIA is down more than 3% today. Broadcom more than 4%. AMD down 3%. Qualcomm, Micron, Intel, all of them are down. Oracle is down. And this is in part due to the Dell results. Dell announced earnings, and they came in lighter on revenue and margins outlook. And the stock may have done a top, in my opinion. So currently a $90 billion stock. It was as high as about $100 billion. Lucia, how are you?
All good, Yaman. Thank you.
Lucia, do you ever short stocks?
No, unfortunately, I have a mental block. I cannot short anything, even though I will believe it's right.
Why is that? What's the mental block?
Well, Yaman, it's because it will be like predicting the market. While if I sell puts or buy low, at least I know that I own something that has a value. Understand what I mean?
You mean if you sell puts or buy puts?
No, I mean if I sell puts and get assigned, or if I buy a stock right away and it's low, at least I know that I'm making money and I'm buying something that has value if I get assigned and so on. But yeah, otherwise, if I short, basically I'm just predicting the market.
I mean, you're predicting the market either way, whether you're buying or selling puts or buying and selling or shorting stocks. It's all predicting the market.
Well, Yaman, not really, because if you are a value investor and you think a stock is undervalued, that stock can go even lower. But as long as you bought the company when it's undervalued, basically you still have something that you think it's worth more than you bought it for.
I mean, I understand what you're saying. It's just that it's all fugazi. All fugazi. It's all made up. Yeah, I think these are just narratives that don't hold any water. Just agree with me. Whether you're long or short or buy calls or buy puts or sell calls or puts, it's basically everything has a risk. You can make the argument that you can stay in a long position longer than you can stay in a short position, I guess. But let's say, for example, you bought what you believe is an undervalued security, and then there's no catalyst, and the stock just remained underpriced for the next decade. You lost out on a decade's worth of investment that would have gone up otherwise. So that's still a cost. So none of this stuff really, all the rhetoric and the false narratives is just made up. Yes. What do you think of Tesla? Tesla is down about 2% today. It's down about 3.5%, 4% in the last couple of days. Any change in your view?
Well, I think today it was generally because the market was down as at all, the tech market. But I would say that I'm confident that the sentiment is starting to shift. And that I would say. Yeah.
What do you make of Rivian? Is at $12 per share now. It was as low as $10 about 4 days ago after the news. that they got a $6.6 billion loan from the Department of Energy with capitalized interest. Has your view of the company changed?
Well, yeah, man, to be honest, yes, it has changed. In my opinion, it's a big deal. Like that company, it's a company that if you remove tax credit and if you look at the future, it's a company that probably has none. Like it's a dead company. But if you start to think like that, maybe in California, it can be incentivized. People maybe start to prefer Rivian to Tesla. Could that company start growing in California and then expanding? I don't know. In some way, I think it has changed a little bit, at least in my mind.
Joey, what do you think? Do you think Rivian is worth more today than it was a week ago?
Probably not, but I guess their runway got extended.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we don't really know what the conditions are. I think there's some conditions on this loan, financial, operational. I don't know the details of it, but it's a large number of money, and at a minimum, it shows some support from the government. But that government is kind of on the way out. So I don't know when Trump comes, what happens to this loan. And yeah, I don't know. But I'm increasing my position already in short. So Joey, do you ever short stocks? Go ahead, Joey.
Yeah, I was actually just gonna ask you. I mean, I don't ever short stocks. I've just kind of like heard from hearsay of so do you have to pay like a certain balance to your broker, or how does that work?
What do you mean pay a certain balance?
I guess because you're like when you short, you're borrowing somebody else's shares, and then I heard it's common practice that like you pay like 6% or whatever while you're borrowing somebody's shares. Is that how it works for you?
Yeah, basically, you pay interest on the borrowed shares, and that interest rate varies depending on demand and supply of those shares.
Okay, got it. So I guess you've kind of made your calculation of how much you're willing to pay for the interest and all that stuff.
Well, the interest you pay is usually low, and it's only in cases where there's a tremendous amount of demand for shorting the stock, right? That interest kind of shoots up every now and then. So I take it you've never shorted a stock then.
No, I've actually only got like the opposite side. I've had stocks that I've got paid because of the short interest is high, but never shorted.
Okay, gotcha. I'm guessing that's Tesla.
They don't break it down individually, but I think it was like Lemonade, maybe Upstart, like when all those companies were down really low in 2022.
Are you still a Lemonade shareholder?
Yeah, I am.
All right. So the stock is worth about $3.4 billion. It's gone up in the last couple months it's tripled in the last couple of months.
Yeah.
Where do you see value in Lemonade?
Um, I actually think the tripling's kind of crazy. I've debated taking a little bit of profits, but I haven't. I usually like to value stuff on sales, as you've probably heard. But I think like in between 7 to 12 times sales makes sense for a lemonade, but I think we're getting close to stretching past that.
What's their profit margin?
I don't think they're profitable. They're more just in growth mode. The CAC is very expensive for them.
Then how did you come up with the revenue multiple?
I mean, I kind of take it as like I guess I would consider it like kind of like a seed investment for me as far as like if it goes to zero, like I thought for a while during 2022 it might go to zero, but if they grow enough to hit scale, then it would work out, you know?
I got you. Okay. Lucia, what do you think about Lemonade?
I just know they are an insurance company, not other than that.
Okay. All right, let's talk some Tesla. I don't think many people Joey, so Tesla is your top holding, I'm guessing, right? What's your second holding?
Yeah, my top holdings Tesla, and then Nvidia is just because of the insane run that it is. So yeah.
Now let's talk some Nvidia. What do you think about the company? Where do you think it's undervalued still? Are you holding or are you looking to sell? Where do you stand on it?
Yeah, so I got my first Nvidia shares in 2018, around the same time as Tesla. It's feels fully valued to me, but like over the long term, I think it'll be one of the $10 trillion companies. So I've trimmed a little bit, but I trimmed at like 50% lower than what it is now.
What do you think about the fact that I'm short both of your top holdings?
Yeah, it was kind of funny. I was updating like some of my financial spreadsheets this week or last Saturday, and I was calculating, and I think like over 70% you're short. So I was like, oh dang, okay, well.
Oh, what's your third, fourth holding?
So I said direct and indirect because Bitcoin's my third biggest holding when I was compiling those
Oh, I
numbers.
see.
Yeah,
Interesting. Yeah,
but I don't know.
MicroStrategy is a hell of a company.
Yeah, I
Oh,
don't own any MicroStrategy directly though.
why not?
Um, I guess I rather see how many Bitcoin I actually have, like the number.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. Lucia?
So, Yaman, I had a question for you on MicroStrategy. So, do you think there is a risk that if Bitcoin goes down in price, MicroStrategy could not be able to, to pay back the interest on the bonds, or do you think they are safe in that sense?
I don't know the answer to that question because I haven't done a deep down balance sheet analysis. And of course, that's a possibility, I guess, but I don't expect that to be a likely scenario. And I'm not betting on that. By the way, can I just say, somebody, and we can talk about MicroStrategy more, but last night, someone in another space described me as a class act. Do you agree with that? I don't think I've ever been described before as a class act. I was like, wow, that's amazing. Anyway,
Is
that
it a
person,
question?
yeah, that person is in here right now. Anyway, Luce, so you said, can MicroStrategy go bankrupt on the interest, right? I don't know. Let's see. I mean, how would that even happen? I don't think that's the likely scenario. Let me pull up their balance sheet. Luce, go ahead, and then Joey.
Yeah, so I was thinking that if the chances of them going bankrupt or not being able to repay for the bonds is low, I think theoretically there might be a theoretically chance to sell some puts or to buy MicroStrategy in the case Bitcoin goes down. I think it will make sense as long MicroStrategy doesn't go bankrupt, basically.
Joey?
Yeah, so I do think it's interesting with that accounting standard update for digital assets. I believe most public companies will be marking all their Bitcoin to fair value. which will be kind of an insane event for MicroStrategy because I think I've seen different places it might be like up to $20 billion that they recognize as a gain.
But that's non-cash, right?
Yeah, but so when you're looking at that balance sheet, do you have it up? I think they have like it marked as like 3 to 4 billion on their balance sheet, so it'll be like 23 billion that they actually have on their.
I understand, but that's still non-cash fair value adjustments. I don't think that matters too much to companies. I mean, here's what he said, by the way. Here, I'll pin at the top of the screen is a clip that somebody put. So a common criticism from MicroStrategy is that it's trading at 3 times its underlying Bitcoin value. Okay, so here's the video. It's a 5-minute video. So Michael Saylor's asked specifically, what do you think about the idea that your company is trading at 3 times its Bitcoin value? Joey, have you seen this video?
No, I haven't.
What do you think he says?
No, I don't know. Knowing Michael Saylor, he probably makes an analogy of how Bitcoin is real estate in cyberspace.
You know, you're right that he does make an analogy, and he compares MicroStrategy to Microsoft, Apple, and Standard Oil, and says these companies are also trading. Microsoft is trading 50 times its net asset value, tangible asset value, he says. And so it's normal that MicroStrategy is also doing that. What do you think about that as somebody who's experienced in accounting?
Actually, I think I did see a clip of that because then he goes on to talk about like if Microsoft reports like $1 billion swing in earnings, he like extrapolates it out, right?
Yeah, that might be a different clip, but yeah, I don't know. What do you think about what he said? Do you think it's a valid comparison, valid analogy?
It doesn't sound like it on the face.
So why not? You think? Why isn't it a valid comparison? You think?
Well, he's comparing. So say it again. He's comparing intrinsic value of
No.
Microsoft versus. Yeah. Go ahead.
So basically, a common criticism, which also a couple other, there's a lot of people who say the same thing. Like, why would you buy MicroStrategy stock at 3 times the value of its underlying Bitcoin holdings when you can buy Bitcoin straight or even leverage Bitcoin just directly? And Michael Saylor says that just like Microsoft is trading at 50 times its tangible asset value, that MicroStrategy also deserves a premium to this net asset value. What do you think?
So I think it's like kind of comparing apples and oranges of how I look at things. MicroStrategy, I do understand like the premium as far as it's kind of like basically that small software business they have, they generate a certain amount of cash flow, and they can use that cash flow to buy more Bitcoin. And if you believe Bitcoin's going up in the future, then there is some premium there. But then I think the Microsoft's like it's apples versus that oranges because Microsoft's actually valued on like present value of future cash flows from the core business and their historical growth rates.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you look at a real estate company, for example, I think a real estate company is okay to value on a cost basis. So there are 3 main valuation methods. 1, income method. 2, comparative company analysis, and then like comps analysis, and then 3, cost basis. Cost basis is very unique, and it's really mostly reserved for kind of real estate companies. And multiple of a net asset value is a cost method or valuation of a company. And the reason is because in accounting, as you know, let's say, for example, plant property equipment is recorded at cost. Okay. But Tesla, for example, uses those factories to generate Tesla cars that no one else can put up a factory and generate those cars at those margins with that brand value, etc. So no one really has Tesla's discounted cash flow, like income potential. So it doesn't make sense to value Tesla on a price to book basis, which is essentially what this multiple of net asset value is. And so like Microsoft has a monopoly basically on some of the productivity software that it has, like Excel. And Bitcoin, I mean, MicroStrategy doesn't have that. Like if it was the case that MicroStrategy was the only company that can do what MicroStrategy is doing, which is buy Bitcoin and do some financial engineering and then sell it off to others in convertible debt in other forms, equity, etc., then maybe, okay, like if MicroStrategy had a patent on it or, a unique, way of doing it so that nobody else could replicate for the next like decades to come, then it makes sense to say what he's saying. But any company can do what MicroStrategy is doing. Apple can do it. So Tesla can do it. So it doesn't make sense to, like what he's saying doesn't make any sense to me. Go ahead, Joey.
Yeah. But I guess I would posit the question: if Bitcoin goes up to $10 million in 2035, how much do you think MicroStrategy is worth?
I don't know, but the thing is, like, why wouldn't I, if I have $1 million today, why wouldn't I buy Bitcoin at its face value as opposed to paying 3 times the MicroStrategy? Or if I want to leverage play, get one of these 2x ETFs on Bitcoin or 3x instead of paying MicroStrategy.
Yeah, you would have to do the leverage play, but I do think the end result is very similar for a leverage play. It's just how much leverage you're doing.
Well, there's other risks involved too, right? Like with MicroStrategy, you're taking the operational risk, management risk, and a bunch of other risks. So it's not the same. Like buying a leveraged Bitcoin ETF or some sort of options play on Bitcoin is a lot more pure if I think Bitcoin is going to go to 1 million than buying MicroStrategy. So what upside do I have for taking on that incremental risk by buying MicroStrategy stock? Anyway, Luce?
So Michael Saylor says, I don't know if you already said it because I went absent for 3 or 4 minutes, whatever. So basically, he said that MicroStrategy offers, they offer their contribution to the market because they offer like option play, volatility for investors that want to invest in this kind of stuff. So this is where their value stands. And even an ETF that is leveraged 2 times or 3 times doesn't have this kind of volatility, option play, and so on. So this is why somebody should buy option, sell option, or whatever on MicroStrategy. And then the second reason.
But that's volatility is priced into the option price, right? In terms of implied volatility.
Yeah. But this is their contribution. This is what they are generating for the people, let's say.
That makes no sense because let's say, for example, I'm looking at options on. I don't even know if these are possible, to be honest with you, but I'm pretty sure you can find a way to leverage Bitcoin straight up. Let's say you want to put, buy options on Bitcoin versus options in MicroStrategy. You're going to pay more in premium for MicroStrategy for the same outcome instead of buying straight options or leverage play on Bitcoin, because MicroStrategy equity is already very volatile. Like that volatility is intrinsic in the stock. unless yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but in Italy, for example, you have 46% taxes on profit of Bitcoin. They just introduced it. So MicroStrategy is a stock. You don't pay as much taxes. At least that.
Okay. I mean, how many countries do you think that's true?
I have no clue, but there are some.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not aware of any country. You just told me about Italy. Joey, what do you think?
I think you're making good points. I think it's kind of like, or in my head, it's offloading kind of like your ability to purchase as many Bitcoin as you can get, and you're kind of just letting him try to purchase a bunch. And I think that there is a arbitrage on the upside and downside. Like right now, how you're talking about it's multiples of what the Bitcoin value is. I believe like in 2022 when everything was in a drawdown, it was the opposite, right? So you could probably play it both ways.
Okay, great. So somebody in YouTube Live chat says MicroStrategy debts are 0% interest rate. That's not necessarily true. Like it's 0% coupon rate, but you're still diluting your shareholder base if these convertible debts convert at a certain share price. So there is some implied interest cost. Like these are not 0% cost free. I know I've heard that too, which is completely wrong. Like the other thing is like sometimes a big red herring is like for example, what's his face? The host of All In Podcast. What's his name?
Jason Calacanis.
Yeah, Jason posted kind of like crowdsourced research and said, what like why wouldn't you buy Bitcoin straight, like three times a Bitcoin? And there are 600 replies. I'll pin it up here. And he posted a bunch of things, right? Bunch of tweets on this. 600 replies. And if you go through the replies, there's literally like I don't see any good replies. Most of the replies are like just listen to Michael Saylor, what Michael Saylor has to say. So yeah, I don't know.
I guess the one thing I guess you could look at is if you bought MicroStrategy 2 years ago, you're up 2,000%. But if you bought Bitcoin, you're up, I guess, less than that. What,
Well, that's
485%?
because of the hype, I think, that's going into the stock.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, agree.
Just a lot of momentum and hype, which of course can continue. But I'm just trying to find out if there's any fundamental value to the stock at all. So on their balance sheet, they have as of September 30th, they have $6.9 billion of digital assets. So I'm guessing that's their Bitcoin holdings. So if you divide 6.9 billion by 98,000 for the Bitcoin price, you're looking at
That won't be right though, because it's
why?
not marked at fair value. It's not
Oh,
90.
you're right. You're right. So when does that start?
From what I read, I believe it's at the end of this fiscal year. So,
Oh, I see.
10K
So you're
filing.
saying they're going to mark up their balance sheet because of that.
Exactly.
Okay. Didn't he already announce how many Bitcoins they have?
Yeah, they do. I just don't have it offhand. I believe it's about 210,000 because I think they have about 1% of Bitcoin supply.
All right. Let's see. During 2023-2024, we used proceeds from capital raise transaction. As of September 30, we have an aggregate of approximately 252,000 Bitcoins. So if you take 252,000 and multiply by 98,000, you're looking at about $25 billion. And I think they bought some more since then. So it's about 3x of their, yeah. Ken says in YouTube live chat, they now have 331,000 Bitcoins. As of November 8th, they have 331,000 Bitcoins. So multiply by 97,000, you're looking at $32 billion. It's about 3 times. I don't know. Weird stuff. Joey, where do you think Bitcoin is going?
Yeah, I mean, I piggyback a little bit off of a lot of people that follow the space closer. Chamath made that prediction in All In Pod like 5 months ago or something about 250 to 300K. I think this bull cycle probably is in between 250 to 500K. Tops out.
So who made that argument?
Chamath Palihapitiya on All In Pod.
What did he say?
He said that he kind of like compared previous Bitcoin cycles and then backed into kind of like what his price target was for the end of this bull cycle. And I believe he had about 250 to 300K.
So what was his reasoning?
I think it was just like kind of like stock to flow analysis. You know, supply versus the demand that'll be onboarded.
Okay. Somebody in the reply says they hold closer to 2% of outstanding Bitcoins.
I mean, yeah, because all Bitcoin isn't issued yet, and then they're above that 210K I was talking about. So in between 210 and 420. Yeah, if they get closer to 420, they definitely would have 2%.
All right. You want to talk some NVIDIA?
Sure.
Well, the stock is up about 1.5% since you said that's your second biggest holding. So you're moving the market, Joey. What do you think is the value of the company?
So I guess like my price target would be 10 trillion in like 5 to 10 years. But right now it seems fully valued. I wouldn't be surprised to see it come back 40%, but the problem is like the momentum hasn't broke down in my view, and I don't think it's likely to break down because I still think there's going to be a lot of capex spend over these next couple of quarters.
Blue chip?
Yeah, so I had a question for Joy. So I have two problems when somebody claims that a company is worth 10 trillion, 30 trillion, or whatever. My two problems are those, basically. So first of all, there is a reason why most of the companies are worth maximum 3 trillion, 3.5 trillion. I think it's very, very hard to manage a company the more it grows. Okay, so generally speaking, but then my second opinion on NVIDIA specifically is that you really discount the danger of Taiwan for NVIDIA. Taiwan is going to happen at some point, and you are so confident that NVIDIA is going to 10 trillion, no matter what. So yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm confident, but that's kind of my view. And then I guess I just kind of look at just like GDP growth over the long term. I think that GDP is going to grow to like in 10 years, probably like 80 trillion. So then there's going to be mega companies that pick up that 80 trillion. And I think NVIDIA is one of them.
How did you get to $10 trillion?
Yeah, so there's not an exact calculation, and my numbers are like I did an exercise where I kind of looked at 1960s GDP in the US versus like 2010 GDP in the US, and then I kind of like extrapolated out what I think the GDP will be in like 2040, 2050 for the US, and then I kind of did like a market cap weighting of what the current big companies are now compared to that GDP. I know that sounds really out there for just a standard accounting finance person.
So, for example, if I told you that I think there will be competing GPUs more so than today in the next couple of years, how does that impact your percentage of GDP estimate?
It doesn't impact it too much. Like I could see another trillion-dollar company being like AMD might be that company. But I guess I think a general trend is that gross margins across the economy will go up. And so I don't buy into as much of the gross margins being a concern for NVIDIA.
So you believe that NVIDIA will continue to be the market leader and charge 73, 74, 75% gross margins to its customers?
Not necessarily 70%, but yeah, the market leader, and maybe it drifts down to like 40% or something along those lines, but off a way bigger base, you know.
If the gross margin halves from 75 to 40, what happens to the net income margin?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
In another way to ask, how much operating leverage is there in this business, do you think?
I think there's a fair amount. I guess like I do think that there's going to be a lot of people building on top of their Omniverse platform. So I think that a lot of like robotics verticals will be using their CUDA software and the Omniverse. Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah. All right. Lucia, any thoughts?
My thought on NVIDIA is that at some point they will have to switch from hardware to make a huge profit also on software. And in fact, with CUDA and Omniverse and so on. So until like as things are right now, with basically software not generating that much profit, I would say that NVIDIA is overvalued. But it's such a great company that somebody should always be ready to jump in if the time is right.
Did you sell any puts on NVIDIA?
It's too early. It's too early. I would, but NVIDIA has to go around $100 for me to start selling puts or buying outright.
Did you say $100?
Yeah, I think $100 is
How'd you reach
very
that
good
level?
valuation.
How did you reach that level?
Well, $100 is around 40p, something like that. And for a great company like Nvidia with strong financials, and I also think that the trend on profitability and margins will continue. So if the market undervalues Nvidia and it goes around 100, which is also a resistance point for the stock itself, I think it's a great opportunity.
Joey?
Yeah, I just wanted to say full disclosure. I mean, if it's above like $150, that is kind of like my mental of where I kind of want to take a little bit more profit. Like I said, I've had it since 2018, so my cost basis on those shares is extremely low. But over the long term, I just want to accumulate as many shares as I can.
Did you take any profits last time? Is it 150?
I didn't, but it was more so I wasn't following it as closely at 150. But I did take.
So hold on. So you're saying that you would take some profits at 150, but it was there about 3 weeks ago and you didn't. So what changed in 3 weeks?
I think I literally just missed it because before the previous earnings, I was also thinking the same thing. So yeah, I mean, I took profits at like what's 50 to like 75. But I mean, it was like less than 10% of my holdings, and it would be probably similar, like probably 5% of my total holdings.
Okay. Let's talk some Tesla. So at the top of our screens is a reply to Gavin Baker. I listened to an interview that he had a few weeks ago, and he goes deep into his expectations from AI, how the AI industry will fold out. And I thought it was a really interesting discussion. It's about an hour and a half. I highly recommend people listen to it. Through the link at the top of our screens, you can actually see the podcast and you can listen to it on Apple Podcast, what have you. But he says in the last half hour, he focused on Tesla. Luce, this question is for you. Gavin Baker says that people who are showing, who are skeptical of FSD are going to have a rude awakening soon in the next 12 to 18 months, possibly as early as 6 months. And he says that exactly the quote is at the top, actually. He says, "It is clear to me looking at the crowdsourced data, miles between disengagements, different versions of FSD, that when they cut over to 12.3, which is effectively all deep learning, I think eliminating almost all human code, something dramatic change in the rate of progress. And then when they cut over to 12.5, which runs best on AI4, which used to be called Power 4, it's just like the local computer of a Tesla. It is now rolling out to AI3 was another step function." So basically he says 12.3 and 12.5 both showed step function improvements in mouse disengagement. Lucia, what do you think?
So first of all, I think that 12.4, the one after 12.3, was worse, basically, and never was released wild, which means that I don't know what is looking for improvements as some exponential improvements coming, but it's not to be seen, at least in the data of FSD tracker. Now, if he has some other kind of data, then obviously he might be right, but it's super far from what we see. So I don't know what he's saying, basically.
So he says in crowdsourced data, like he's actually says crowdsourced data. What other crowdsourced data is there other than FSD tracker? Am I not aware of another source? Lucia?
So for a small period of time, Tesla Scope released for few beta testers his software, which should be more capable of the FSD tracker. And basically, they said that they never. Wait a second.
Joey, what do you think? Wow, Lucia.
Sorry. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, Lucia, go ahead.
So basically, they first of all, they never released what they saw from that software. But then they commented on saying that FSD tracker was very good and the data itself was somewhat similar, or at least it was a good reference. They themselves say that. So other than those two, I am not aware of anything.
Data was very similar to what, Lucia?
To the FSD tracker.
Okay, so that wouldn't show that, and that's you're saying that's not publicly available data. So, Joey, what do you think Gavin is referring to here?
Sorry, give me a second as I take a closer look.
Yeah, I'm really curious because he is definitely someone I respect, and whose opinion I respect and I often agree. But on this one, we disagree, and I think it just sounded like the way he was kind of talking about it, the things he was saying, it just sounded like a more superficial, on this, I don't want to say understanding, but superficial take on it. And that was a little surprising. And then the rest of the half hour or 20 minutes he's talking about Tesla FSD is also similarly a little off. Like it's not kind of like, okay, like if I don't know of another crowdsourcer and you're referring to Tesla FSD tracker and you're saying there's a step change improvement in 12.3 and then 12.5 in miles per disengagement, then if that's factually incorrect, all that tells me is that you didn't really spend time on it. Because somebody who spends so much time on it deeply on the topic, they don't get a fact like that wrong. I mean, another possibility is that he's referring to what Elon said, but that he specifically says crowdsource data. So are you confusing management statement with the crowdsource data? Because that's another kind of like huge red flag. Luce?
So there is another metric that it seems to be more in line with what Elon says, which is miles between obstacles. So basically, how good the car is on avoiding basically going to a wall, basically. And you can see that in the FSD tracker, and that is basically improving in a rate that could be as Elon says. But generally speaking, let's say the FSD has to be complete. It's not because the car doesn't go and make an accident going, I don't know, going front on the front of a wall, then you cannot. It's a good metric. So basically, yeah. So that's maybe what this was referring to. Miles for obstacles, basically, maybe.
Okay, can you walk me through the TeslaFSDtracker.com to find that figure?
Yeah, I can. Maybe later because I basically have to go now.
No, let's do it right now.
Bro, okay.
Come on. So I'm on TeslaFSDtracker.com. Where is this miles per obstacle metric you're talking about?
Can I? Okay, I will post it in the comments in a few minutes. Okay.
Okay, Joey.
Yeah, maybe you can educate me because I haven't followed this data as closely as you have. But I just imagine like a lot of this would be noisy because like sometimes like I'll take my Tesla and I'll try to like see if it can go through like my apartment gate, which it obviously can't. And so like when it's getting close to the gate to like hit it, I'll disengage it. And I'll do that like 5 different times and I'll just like push the bounds to see how it can drive around in my apartment complex. So is there a way to adjust for that, Yaman, in any of these data sets?
Sorry, adjust for what exactly?
Like So like imagine an apartment gate that's closed and then it opens up when the sensor like detects it. So like FSD right now, if I do it, it'll drive around in my parking lot, but if I didn't disengage the system, it would run into the fence. It would run into the gate. So I disengage it. So
Yeah.
that should be,
I mean, that's a question for Elias. I don't obviously know the details of every single disengagement, but unless you're saying all of a sudden people are trying to, avoid hitting their gates more than they did about a year ago, then it's kind of like irrelevant,
yeah. I mean, I think that the noisies or the data is noisy around that when new versions roll out, because I do it more when, new versions roll out. And like I do it a lot more now than I did like a year ago because I can play with it more because it's better.
I mean, all data is noisy.
Right.
And we can speculate about what if this happens and that happens, but you don't have any proof. Like if you came to me and said, I asked, 1,000 people, and for this reason, in the last year, people are smashing into their gates more often. And we should adjust what we're seeing the results for that. And then yeah, I might look into it, but that's a hell of a speculation. And the fact is, Elias has been challenged on this Tesla FSD tracker for years now. I mean, he's been challenged from so many people claiming this and that. Like, for example, if you look at the screenshot, there is a section kind of on the left, 3/4 of the way that says individual Teslas miles driven, 200 to 400, and then 400 plus. The reason why he added that box is because there was somebody who went out there and said, "Oh, if you just focus on these, more experienced drivers, then it's improved." And it's turned out to be a complete bullshit. And so Elias has been going through this attacks for his data set for years, and he's successfully defended it for years. Machine, go ahead.
Yeah, look, my position on the FSD beta tracker hasn't really changed in the last 2 years. I've been saying that despite all its flaws, if you truly have a technology that is 10xing or 100xing critical disengagements, miles per critical disengagement, then it will show up clearly in the tracker. It's simply too big of a difference for the signal noise ratio to drown out. And you can argue all these aspects about specific drivers or people entering the wrong data, but ultimately, there's such a vast improvement needed that you simply are not going to keep disengagements like 100 to 200. Like that's egregious. So it does provide real value. And I would say the one caveat I would just say, as the software actually does get closer to what we'd argue is robotaxi level, that software does become less powerful simply because there's not enough people, not enough miles to confidently extrapolate out the miles per disengagement. You simply won't have enough disengagements. But that's not right now. Right now, there's plenty of disengagements.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really a shame that people try to paint this tracker in a bad light and discredit it. It's not very surprising, but it is a shame still. I think it's huge disrespect to all the work that Elias has put into this tracker over the years. Machine, what do you think of Gavin's comment at the top? Did you listen to the podcast, his interview a few weeks ago? It's about an hour and a half long, and he focuses on Tesla FSD in the final 20 minutes or so.
No, I don't pay much attention to stuff lately. It's not close. What do you say?
So he said exactly the quote that I typed it out at the top. He said, "It's clear looking at the crowdsourced data that when Tesla cut over to 12.3 and 12.5, there were two step function improvements according to crowdsourced data." I'm not seeing that in the tracker. What is he talking about?
I don't know who Gavin Baker is. I think I've heard of this name before, but do I care who Gavin Baker is? Is he an expert in this area? I'm going to go with no. And, I do believe people who drive the software have observed significant changes and improvements to the software in terms of the smoothness and a lot of areas of improvement, especially non-critical interventions. I do believe that. And I think that's kind of the key difference between people right now and their understanding is I think Tesla's improved the drivability and usability of the software. And people like Rains, if you're familiar with Rains, that account, he actually tried to back end access some of the API or however he pulled the data from this dashboard and did a nice study, which it was something I do in my work, which is intra-subject assessing. So control the subjects, control the user drivers, and look at the trends within drivers. That way you're not getting this noise between drivers if you have new drivers. And he showed.
But the thing is, I understand, I read that tweet and everything. But the thing is, now you're down to a handful of people.
Well, I'm still not finished. I'll make a point here.
Okay.
One, I agree with you. You have less people, but he showed
it's
better
not just less
improvement.
people, dude. It's a fraction of the
Yeah,
people.
that he showed better results for regular disengagement improvement. However, I then tweeted him. I'm like, yeah, the obvious thing to do here is take that same data and look at critical disengagements, and he did not. Why did he not do that? Because some people have a story they're trying to tell, and that did not align with that story. Very clearly, if you did critical disengagements, it was not going to show the same improvement. So I think the fact is critical disengagements simply have not improved as much as people are thinking. And this account, Gavin, doesn't know that apparently.
You know who Gavin Baker is. Don't bullshit me. Don't gaslight me here.
I'm serious, I don't.
Yes, you do. We have a question for you, Machine. If you were to design this FSD tracker, how would you design it? How would you design differently? The question comes from Pune Man from YouTube live chat.
I don't know. I don't even know all the details of what he requires for entering data here. I think he does a good job from what I've read of trying to filter out people who are going to put in garbage and controlling people who are repeatable users. So I don't really have any big issues with it that off the top of my head. I would just say, I don't know. I don't know. I would be trying to get more data. I don't know how you would, market this thing to get more people to enter data. That's the thing. It's too little data, especially as this thing gets better. It's gonna become irrelevant if the software gets better at this rate. So I don't know how you get more people. It's dwindling. Maybe it's dwindling, kind of like your spaces.
So you would go out for, but if just the design of the tracker, what would you show differently? So you're confident with what Elias is doing. I mean, my view has been that Elias is doing the best he possibly can with what he has. Right? You agree with that statement?
Yeah, I know. Okay. The one thing I would add is kind of range analysis, which maybe he has somewhere, is some plots that focus only on repeat users and their trends.
Well, he kind of has that. That's why he added that little box at the bottom left, individual tester miles driven. So you can filter by people who driven more miles, and it's the same fucking results. Lauren?
Yeah, I think the number one thing he could do to improve that tracker is to add a box that shows live Tesla stock quotes, TSLA. Personally, I almost never use it because I'm a degenerate and I want to have like a browser screen up with Trading View and see what Tesla's doing safely while I'm driving. But I think that would be the number one way he could increase engagement on that site, was to add a little window in it.
I like it. I'll send him the suggestion machine.
I know they sell these boxes that for specific tickers you can put in, and it'll literally just tell you if it's like red or green or the price, like a physical box on your desk or something. So maybe you should get one of those and put it in your car, and you can see Tesla flipping green or red. But I think maybe it would hurt your injury rate or whatever. What was Tesla's metric again? Your safety rating?
Yeah. Wes is in the crowd, and if he wants to come up and maybe answer the question at the top, which I'm trying to figure out what Gavin Baker meant by crowdsourced data. And in the crowdsourced data, he says he saw a step change in 12.3 and 12.5 versions of FSD. Lauren, what do you think Gavin Baker said meant?
I have no idea. Sorry, I wasn't
What
listening that
did
close.
Gavin see? What did Gavin see is the question.
Yeah, I don't follow Gavin Baker. I have no opinion
Why
on that.
not? You know who he is.
I'm with Machine. I've heard the name, but I have no idea who he is.
Oh my gosh, come on. Don't lie. Don't lie. I can't take it seriously. Everyone here has heard of Gavin Baker. Wes, how are you?
Hey, good. I haven't read this yet, so I need to read it.
Okay, so I listened to an hour and a half interview of Gavin Baker, who is somebody I follow closely and respect his opinion. He was, for those of you who may not know him, definitely not Machine and Lauren, or pretending to not know him. But he was a Fidelity Management portfolio manager who was an early investor in Tesla. He is also he invested both in public and private companies with a great track record. And I mean, there's more, but anyway, you can research him if you want. And so he says that in the crowdsourced data, so I'm guessing that he's referring to FSD tracker because I'm not aware of another crowdsourced data. He says different versions of FSD that when Tesla cut over to 12.3, he says, which is effectively all deep learning, which I also don't know if that's necessarily correct. He says, I think eliminating almost all human code, something dramatic change in the rate of progress. And then when they cut over to 12.5, there was another step function change, improvement. And I'm not seeing that in the data. What do you think he's referring to? Do you think I'm looking at the data wrong? Or do you think he's talking about another set of crowdsourced data?
I would think that he's referring maybe to more anecdotal, like just looking at stuff on YouTube. That's what I would think he means by crowdsource. I think FSD Tracker is probably a better source than that overall, like as a trend. Not necessarily specific data points, but a trend over time. I think 12.3 was end-to-end in cities, and then 12.5 is end-to-end on highways as well. And so I think that's probably what he's referring to. I actually did see quite a big change on Cybertruck. Obviously, I went from nothing to end everywhere. So I've been driving Cybertruck now with this build roughly 5.5.2 and now 5.5.3 for 6-7 weeks, and yeah, like it just takes me everywhere except for active school zones and handheld stop signs. So I think that's what he's referring to.
Okay. So you think when he says crowdsourced data, he's referring to anecdotal data, not FSD tracker?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I would think that you'd call that out specifically if that's what you meant, because it's a single data source, and I'm not aware of any other data source that does anything remotely close to what FSD Tracker does. So I assume that if he meant that, he would have said that.
Okay, well, maybe he'll reply to the tweet and say something along those lines. All right. Did you listen? I highly recommend listening to that, Wes, and I would love to hear your views on his takes because he has some very specific takes about NVIDIA, AI infrastructure, FSD, etc. I think that's something we can probably discuss.
Yeah, I'm happy to listen to it.
An hour and a
How long
half.
is it? Oh boy. Okay.
And he talks fast.
All right.
So
well,
you have to kind of listen at 1x.
Okay, great. All right.
All right. Any other questions, comments? Wes, did you see Dell's results? Dell stock is down today quite a bit and down 13%. and it kind of comes at the heel of Nvidia stock being down as well for similar reasons, revenue and margin outlook for the next quarter. Any thoughts about what's driving this?
Dell has changed a lot since I've been there. I left in 06. I know that they're more enterprise focused now, so I would glean that their enterprise revenue and forecasting from their enterprise business is probably down. So that would indicate to me that there might be a decrease in the kind of servers and infrastructure and software services that they're selling to to enterprise. So I feel like they might not have as big of a play into the AI space. So I don't think the two are necessarily tied, NVIDIA and Dell, but I also don't think they're mutually exclusive. So I would just I'd have to do a bit of research to understand like what their server SKUs are and like kind of the things that they sell. Because I don't think they're terribly AI heavy at all.
Okay.
There you go.
I'm going to do a Dell earnings watch party, and then I'm going to go through the earnings release and then the earnings call sometime this week. All right, I see Elias in the listening mode. If he wants to come up, if he can, please come up to the speaker board. Maybe we can discuss a couple of the questions that we talked about the FSD tracker. Elias, how are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
Good. First of all, did you see the tweet at the top?
I did just look at it. Yeah.
Yeah. So Gavin Baker says, looking at the crowdsourced data, miles between disengagement had a step change improvement for 12.3 and 12.5, but I'm not seeing that in your data. So do you think he's referring to another, is there another crowdsourced platform that kind of does what you're doing?
No, but I mean, a lot of people like to refer to videos, so that may be what he's referring to.
Okay, that's what Wes was guessing too. That so why do you think, Elias, that we're seeing in some of the videos significant improvement? People are reporting 1,000 miles per disengagement, whereas in your tracker we're not seeing any improvements in the last 2 years.
We've definitely seen improvements in the last 2 years. So V11 was definitely not really going anywhere, and then V12.3 and 12.3 point releases definitely improved a lot of things, and we saw a 3x jump in performance across the board, both miles of disengagement and miles of critical. But I think there's been a lot of like tweaking and back and forth with 12.5 that it's been a lot of ups and downs, and that's kind of what we see in the data today. But that's also to say that some people do have really great performance. People really do have good experiences. The 1,000 miles disengagement, that's mostly reference to highway data. So when you drive 99% of your highway miles, highway is definitely going to have a lot less issues and a lot less things to worry about than driving in the city. And our data is kind of split 50-50, where about half the miles is in the city and half is on the highway. So you're going to see some variations like that.
Okay. Let's see. Is there a decline in the number of people entering data in recent months?
Hell no. We're up to 150 active users on V12.
Okay, so machine was again incorrect. Let the record reflect. Machine was once again, unsurprisingly, making false claims on the speaker board. I will chastise him when next time he comes here. So 150 users entering data. What do you think is the weakest part of this tracker?
Honestly, more variance on data across different regions. So while we do get a lot of data, I think we're averaging like 20 to 30 states of data that we get coverage on almost every version, which is actually pretty impressive. But that's also one of the limitations, that it may only be, a handful of testers per state. California, Florida, Texas, we typically would see the most of. But other states, maybe 2 to 4 testers, maybe even 1 in some cases. So getting more coverage across regions, especially if we're trying to monitor specific regions for improvements, that's going to be kind of important to get more data from those regions in order to have a little more statistical sample that we can actually evaluate and look at closely.
I see that you've been very patient with people and you reply to almost everybody. And a lot of times you're kind of just having to say the same thing because the criticisms are very similar. Does that bother you at all?
I try not to let it get to me. Sometimes, some people get under people's skin, but I'm pretty thick-skinned. I was in the Marine Corps, so if you've ever met anybody or know somebody that's a Marine, they can probably pretty much deal with anything at that point, because you get all kinds of stuff. But at the same time, there's a lot of criticism that's just regurgitated, for lack of a better word. One person said it's a spreadsheet, or one person said it's small sample size, or this or that, and it's like, or if you don't really understand how the data is being captured, how it's being collected, how it's being improved in accuracy and presentation, then you're just regurgitating things that have been like either resolved or looked at. I've added, the data accuracy tab so people can look at kind of how the sample size affects accuracy over time. And I think a lot of the criticism is like invalid at this point. I think the only criticism that could be valid is people saying it's not enough data, which you could argue both ways. Like, we do get enough data to actually see some results. But then you get the comparison of like people, oh, well, my car goes 1,000 miles to disengagement. And then you got the other side of it that's like, well, I just had 5 critical disengagements in 4 miles. So I think that's one of the benefits of the trackers. You kind of avoid the different spectrums of feedback, and you get a collective sample, because we do have people that get 2,000 miles to a critical disengagement, but then you also have other people that are not getting that many. So the collective sample size brings it in, and then trimming the data, the top 10 percentile, the bottom 10, and then looking at confidence intervals between that range helps you to kind of see that the error bars and bands get tighter if you're looking at that data accuracy tab. So people criticizing that it's not enough data, yes, there's people that are having great experiences, but there's also people that are not having a great experience. And I think you have to look at the entire spectrum, and people kind of ignore that. They're just like, well, everybody's, these people that I basically listen into my echo chamber, they all say it goes 1,000 miles. So it must be these guys are just, being overly cautious, or they don't know how to use FSD, or they're just idiots, or that, it's like you get all these like crazy criticisms, and it's like everybody has their own thresholds. I get that. But at the same time, it's not where it needs to be across the board. And I think that's the biggest thing that I would say is like, people that are criticizing it need to look at it from the full spectrum instead of through one lens or one angle.
Yeah. Thank you. Joey, would you like to ask Elias the question you asked him earlier?
He clarified some of it, but his explanation does align with. I haven't felt like there's been a big step change since V11 to V12. So that aligns, and then I guess my expectations is the next time we'll see something like that is V12 to
No,
V13.
can you ask the specific question about gates?
Oh yeah. Sorry, that's what you're. Okay, so when I drive, well, he answered that I'm not in his data set though, Yaman.
Okay. All right. So you're abandoning your question. Sorry, I don't understand.
Yeah, I'm abandoning it because the answer is I'm not in his data set. But when people test on their gates and they have multiple interventions, and that's like a 0.1 mile trip, that shows up in your data set for people who do that, right, Elias? And that'll just bring it down.
I'll have to go back and look and see what the average miles on a drive is. But the last time I looked at it, I want to say it was 17 miles. So a lot of these smaller trips may, like for example, I get testers that will submit data and they won't submit more than 100 miles or more than 200 miles. So a lot of that stuff doesn't even make it into the data set that's shown, or like when you see those line graphs, it doesn't get shown because if they had 5 critical disengagements, but they only drove 80 miles, that's obviously a very low, they're going to be in the lower percentiles, bottom line. So it looks at that variation because there's standard deviation and all that stuff that's being calculated. So it wouldn't even include that in the represented charts. However, you can go and look at the details to see, for example, specific issues. You can delve into categories of disengagements and stuff like that, and that's not really filtered. But then you can also still see the untrimmed results on that data accuracy tab just to kind of get an overview. But to answer your question specifically, if there's specific issues that are happening, like there was disengagement on my way to work every day. I had like 3, and it was just all 3 lane issues happen every time, and I would just capture. Obviously, the majority of my drives are going to work every day, so I was having like an average of 4 miles to disengagement. However, in V12, Tesla fixed all 3 of those. And so I was then now having, for the most part, 12 miles to disengagement on the way to work. But then you get occasional like weird issues where it's like, drifting over the highway when it's exiting the shoulder, or maybe it would drift over the lane. So then I would still have some lane issues. It wasn't the same ones every time. So capturing disengagements is very important to be consistent because, one, we can track when things are fixed on the tracker if you're using the EV Guide Canada app. But 2, those are representative of all drives. Like if people only report drives where they have 0 disengagements, which is a lot what you see on X right now these days, is people only posting the positive drives. If you look at, again, the collective data set of everybody going to work, going to the grocery store, going to wherever they go, that data collection matters, and seeing that sample across the board.
Yeah. Wes?
Hey, Elias, I love FSD Tracker. I think it's wonderful. My question revolves around biases. Is there a way for me or for others to hear you explain like what you think the biases are in the data? In other words, like I'm trying to understand if there's a more accurate or precise definition of a critical disengagement. Maybe my example would be I have a twisty road and Cybertruck wants to drift over the double yellow. Not a lot, but like, just it hits one yellow. Would some people maybe consider that a critical disengagement if it like touches, a tire touches one of the yellow lines on a twisty road, or not? And I'm just trying to give you an example to help me understand the definition. Thanks.
Yeah, I honestly don't think most people would track that as a critical disengagement. And one of the things with tracking critical disengagements is we don't have like a category that you just pick critical, right? So that's another one that people are like, oh, well, somebody could just enter in, a bunch of critical disengagements. We only have very specific categories, and those categories have been the same since February of 2022, which I think it's really important to be consistent, because if we change the definitions 5 times, then the data is going to be all skewed and all over the place. But it's basically the categories of driving on the wrong side of the road, about to crash, taking a red light, taking a stop sign, passing a stop school bus with a stop sign, and emergency vehicles. Those are all the categories for critical disengagements. Obviously, there could be categories that are like, it's like blurred the line, and I don't know if it should be or not. So again, we try to avoid those like, gray areas. If it's not one of those 5 or whatever 6 categories I just rattled off, then it's not going to be counted as a critical disengagement. So that helps remove some of the bias. Obviously, somebody could, have an issue at a traffic light. For example, let's say it's creeping too far and they hit traffic light. They may not have been in any danger and they may not have taken a red light, but they may have just categorized it as a traffic light issue. So that could obviously come into play. But for the most part, the categories are just the categories. Like there's no, in between. Like you pick the categories and then you're moving on. I think I've even had the question of people like, oh, well, we should add the option to allow people to categorize. And it's like, you do that, like it's just going to be all over the place. You're not going to have any consistency. So this is like the most consistent way that we could do it, to answer your question.
Habib.
That's super helpful. Thank you.
Habib.
Elias, thanks for getting on the space and going over. I just tweeted you earlier. I appreciate you going over this stuff, and I appreciate the FSD tracker. I do want to just ask you to clarify. Did you say you have 150 users right now?
We've had a total of 300 plus, but over the last probably 6-7 months, we have 150. Yes.
You know, my criticism has always been and will continue to remain that the p-value of this tracker is statistically insignificant, unfortunately. 150 users is very low. That's would be less than 0.05% of the estimated active FSD users, which if we said just was 500,000, for instance. And the problem that I feel with this is that by having, and when you have a very low amount of users, you have low accuracy and low precision in the data, along with all the other different types of biases and all that stuff that we mentioned before. My suggestion would be, or I was just wondering, is there any way for the individual, whoever is inputting their data, to be able to compare themselves with their previous entry of data?
Yeah, of course. So on the tester view tab, you have the ability to view, like a tester could go and view their own data and see progress over time. But then even if you're not looking at your own data, let's say you wanted to go in there, Habib, you could go through, there's a tester ID drop-down menu, and you could pick the tester ID and filter and look at that individual tester's data. There's another one called, I think it's tester percent of drives, where it just kind of shows the percent of drives over time, but that one also has IDs on them too. So to answer your question about the p-value though, one of the things that I've done with the, I think you've seen it, the data accuracy tab, is to try to calculate standard deviation, confidence intervals, because you get a wide variety of data, like I mentioned before. I don't know if you heard me talking about it, but basically you could have a user in California that has, 1,000 miles to critical disengagement, and then a person in New York City having a different experience where maybe it's 50 miles to critical disengagement. So you have to look at basically the range of that data, and then be able to calculate the confidence intervals and kind of tighten up the error bands or error bars in order to kind of figure out what that range would be. So on the data accuracy tab, you can kind of see the untrimmed and trimmed data set to kind of see what would look like without it being trimmed, and also when it's actually trimmed to try to account for those kind of issues. So it's not perfect, obviously. I'm trying to do my best to make sure the data is representative of all the testers that are reporting data, but also accounting for potential issues like somebody coming in, although it hasn't happened, somebody coming in and reporting, 100 disengagements in 5 miles, or, 10,000 miles and 0 disengagements. We're trying to avoid those kind of issues. And so that trimming and those kind of things, the calculations that are in there are accounting for differences or high variations. But at the end of the day, I also still monitor for those kind of issues too, to make sure that we don't have somebody going in there on either end and being malicious, entering in something that's falsified that looks way too high or way too low. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. And I apologize. That part I wasn't aware of, the tracker that you can compare your own data to yourself. And I'm going to just spend some time on that, and we'll touch base. Thanks for going over this stuff.
Yeah, and I saw your tweet, so thank you for sending that. And I'm glad we could chat about it. To answer your tweet specific points, as I mentioned to Wes, I think the biggest thing is trying to avoid things that are gray areas when it comes to categorizing disengagements. Keep it very specific to, it's a traffic light issue or a lane issue or an issue with maps and navigation. So it tries to avoid, how people feel about something like, oh, that was critical. It almost hit this piece of grass on my driveway.
Wes.
Hey, two things for me. One, I don't consider the p-value an issue because I'm not seeing like kind of big differences or extremes in the data. So I don't worry as much about that. And I also love the idea that the tracker is over time. So I more use it for trends, not specific data points on specific builds. I like to see the trends because that's what I think is important. And then my other thing that I want to mention is that we had a major power outage in Seattle, and I don't think that the current build on my Cybertruck supports lights that are dead or dark. And if I had been reporting data on FSD Tracker, I would have had a ridiculous amount of interventions for traffic lights, because it tended to only handle them like maybe 10% of the time. Like 9 times out of 10, it would just kind of do the wrong thing at a dark light. So I don't know if that data is going to show up in FSD Tracker at all, because I assume there's a bunch of cars in Seattle that are reporting data, or other places that might have power outages, but that could be a potential blip. And then maybe I'll make one more point, is that I think, Habib, once you go in and look at this kind of breakdown at data, it'd be nice to know what you think would be an acceptable amount of regular users reporting to kind of alleviate your concerns. Thank you.
Habib.
Yeah, so, my background is just, I'm just in healthcare, and we went through statistics and had to use this stuff to study papers and how to apply this research to patient care. And so we go over a lot of these things, and we call it, like, types of peer reviewing. So this is all just a form of peer review of this data collection tool. It's not a personal attack towards anybody. I want to just make that very clear. I like any contribution towards our community. The p-value comment, though, Wes, it surprises me that it's not so concerning when people say that, because there is such a such a large amount of drives and such a large amount of geographical region, that if your p-value or your users reporting or even your miles reporting is not even large enough, then you could be, this entire data set can be on the fringe, whether it's on
Habib,
the good
can I
side.
ask you something? What is the p-value?
The p-value is the amount of
No.
users.
What's the p-value today for the tracker?
Give me 2 minutes.
No, you should know it, right? If you have done so much, you're so convinced that it is not statistically significant. Have you not calculated already?
For miles, I have, not for the amount of people that we're tracking. I just found out there's only 150 users right now.
Okay. Have you calculated for other measures?
Yeah, for miles.
What is the p-value?
50,000.
And what is it? Sorry, what? P-value is 50,000?
Sorry, I'm going back
P-value
and
goes
forth on
from
this. Yes.
P-value goes
50,000.
from 0 to 1. But the
P-value
thing,
goes, Elias is correct. So what is the p-value, Habib?
I
so
apologize. The amount of miles needed for a statistically significant p-value of greater
No,
than
I asked you a
0.05
specific
is
question.
50,000.
I asked you a specific question, which is, what is the p-value today?
I've calculated a p-value at 0.05 to be 50,000 miles.
Wes.
Hey, yeah, this is why I feel like this number is, it's important, obviously, to be statistically significant. You need a very low p-value, and 0.05 is about right. And I think Elias has roughly that amount of miles in a given amount of time. And I think that amount of time is somewhere in like the month or 2-month time frame. I'm not terribly sure. That's about what it sounds like. If I took 150 drivers and they're driving an average of 40 miles a day, that type of thing, you can kind of get to that number in about a month or 2 months if there's a variance there. But this is why it's not as important for me, because I feel like that's already there and it's been there for quite some time. But that's why I was asking, like, what Habib thought, when his concerns would be alleviated, and maybe they will be one, if you look into it a little bit more, Habib.
Yeah, my concerns would be alleviated when we can have 50,000 miles in specific regions.
Dude, you said 152 testers is not enough for p-value. Now you switch to number of miles. That just shows me you have not done any sort of detailed analysis on this, and you're just coming up to talk about it without any prep, which is exactly what Gavin Baker did. At the top of your screens, he just replied, and now is talking about 52.7% miles going from V11 to V12, even though he mentioned miles per disengagement and 12.3 and 12.5. So he's changing what he said, which is exactly what you did. The fact is, the only person the only person in this space who has looked at this the most is Elias Martinez, and everybody else, except maybe for Wes, is talking out of their ass. Elias?
No, he has a valid point, and that's why I mentioned earlier about getting more variety in different regions, because right now it's a pocket full of people, one or sometimes four in different states and regions. So he has a valid point. But I would say, as a it's not going to satisfy the 0.05, but as a way to kind of counter that argument is the data accuracy tab shows the 95% confidence intervals, and confidence intervals give you a range of confidence that you could say that the value falls within that range. And so if you look again at the tab, it shows you breakdown of the trimmed versus untrimmed data sets. And so based on the collected data, again, given it's not, tens of thousands of miles, or even 50,000 miles per month. But you can look at it and say, okay, yeah, based on the data that we do have for these specific versions, it should fall, with 95% confidence within these ranges. And if you look at the yellow line, it's a pretty tight error bar. And I've kind of watched this over time, but basically, when we get about 2,000 miles per version, like a new version comes out tomorrow, about 2,000 miles is when we start to see that error bar getting tighter. And you might see it really wide. Like, for example, when 12.5 first came out, everybody was sharing the tracker saying, oh, wow, look at this huge jump. We're at 600 miles to a critical disengagement. And the error bars, when you looked at the data accuracy at that point in time, it was pretty large. But then once we hit about 2,000 miles, which was about a week later, it showed, that the error bars were pretty tight. And it wasn't at 600, it was at like 180 or something like that. So I think it's kind of interesting, because again, I watch this data every day like a hawk. And I could see that at a point that it reaches a certain amount of miles, which is about 2,000 on a version, the error bars just tighten up like really good.
Yeah, exactly. That's 100% right. Man, this is wild. I expected a bit more high quality pushback from Habib and Gavin Baker, and just fell flat on their faces. Incredible. Angela?
Hi, Yaman. Hi, you guys. This is a pretty in-depth space you got going on here. Sorry, I've been in and out.
Honestly, this is not even 1% of what I would hope to have in this space. I thought that maybe people did a bit more work, and clearly there's none being done whatsoever, except for Elias. Elias is in like Major League Baseball right now, and everybody else is like West's minor league, because I mean he clearly has the knowledge, but I don't think he doesn't have the data that Elias has in the background. And everybody else is little league. And we're like debating who's the better baseball player. Wes and then Elias.
No, so I'm just going to say regarding FSD, I'm very optimistic on it. Okay. And I'm going to back it up in a couple of different ways. So we do have China approaching on us, as we've seen. And I messaged the pony that went up IPO today, along with WeRide. But bigger than that. So in the drone space, which I'm very optimistic on, we now have an assignment of Donald Trump Jr. was announced today. He's going to be part of the drone committee. So for me, that means just
I want to focus on this tracker, if you don't mind, Angela.
Sure.
Okay. Wes, you had your hand up.
Yeah, maybe real quick. I just want a small clarification. So if FSD goes through an active school zone and doesn't slow down and children are present, I assume your data would consider that a critical disengagement, Elias, is that correct?
It currently does not. So right now we just have wrong speed limit as a disengagement. And the thing you mentioned, I forgot to reply to you on the traffic lights being out for the power outage. That would just be a phantom braking or slow creep and acceleration category. So it wouldn't actually be a disengagement because you're just tapping the accelerator. But yeah, with the speed zones right now, we just categorize wrong speed limit.
Maybe one clarification, just to be clear, on the dark traffic lights, what it would do is it wouldn't even slow down at all. It would just blow right through it.
Oh, then take that back. You would need to disengage them because it wouldn't slow down.
Yep, correct. Okay, thank you.
Elias, you had your hand up earlier.
Hold on. Give me about 10 seconds to remember what it was. I got it. So I remember, I don't know if you remember this, Yaman, but maybe about, I don't know, it feels like 6 months ago. It might have been longer. There was a point in time, it might have been longer. It might have been more like a year. There was a point in time where I was on the space and Omar was, criticizing the tracker, saying, we didn't have enough testers. We didn't have enough data. And one of the comments he made, because I think at the time we were at about maybe 15 to 20 testers actively submitting data. And he's like, yeah, that's not enough. You need like 100 plus. He's like, if there was 100 plus people submitting data on the tracker, I would take it seriously. So I would like to, see if he's willing to follow up on what he said, because obviously he's not seeing the same way that he did about 6 months to a year ago.
Yeah. I don't know. Habib?
Elias, the confidence interval you've set is for 95%.
Yes.
So like if you can use p-value for different things, you use it for based on miles and users. If you just do it off of users, it's about 500 users you need just to be a statistically significant amount of users.
Yeah, one point on that. So one of the things that I find interesting is people like to talk about 400 or 5,000 users on FSD. And while there may be 400 or 500,000 people that have either paid for it outright or on a subscription or trial, one of the things that you can look at is the number of miles that have been accumulated every time they do a quarter
Exactly.
earnings report.
Exactly.
And I looked at this a while back. It's probably been about 6 months, but I looked this a while back. And basically, if you estimate out 12 or 14,000, I forget what I used, 12 or 14,000 miles a year per driver, it should equate to billions. And I don't mean like 1 billion. It should account to multiple billions of miles being driven. So if you actually calculate, like almost, calculate backwards, the total miles reported in, let's say, a quarter, and if there was 400,000 users, it's actually really only the equivalent of 15% of those people actually using it on a regular basis. And so the other thing to factor into that too is a lot of the people that are reporting on the tracker are of that 15%. So you have people that are using it all the time, reporting data all the time. You have people like Cyberlift that's tracking data on Robotaxi, collecting thousands of miles every week. That dude is crazy. But at the end of the day, if you only look at the total number of users, you're kind of missing something because not all those people are using FSD 100% of the time.
I agree with that.
And then,
That's a good
and then the
response.
fact is, you can pick different p-values. You can pick 90% confidence level. You can focus on number of data entries instead of number of users. So there are different things you can focus on. But the fact is, this is the best data set that we have. It's not perfect, but Elias has improved it quite a bit. And it's clear as daylight to me. He is by far the go-to source for measuring progress on FSD. Anything else? All right. Yeah, this is wild. I wasn't expecting. This is, you know what this is like? This is like the Mike Tyson and John Paul fight. You kind of expect it to be a bit more closer, but then it turned out to be just a boring conversation. All right. Thank you, Elias, for coming, and everybody else. And I will chat with you all next time. Take care.